Welcome back, everyone. For this deep dive, we're going really deep into some fascinating territory. We're talking about a proposal that's been making waves in the Orthodox Christian world, a call for a 10th Ecumenical Council.
Yeah, this one's a real head turner.
It really is. This proposal, and it's important to remember this is coming from a single source, lays out a very, I don't know, distinct vision for where the church should go, how it should face these modern challenges.
It really grapples with some really big questions about authority and the nature of the church in the modern world.
Definitely. And it doesn't shy away from some, well, let's just say hot button issues.
Not at all. We're talking church unity,
Mm.
authority, how to handle all the challenges of modernity, even a little geopolitical intrigue thrown in for good
Oh,
measure.
right. It's got it all. So before we get too far, let's set the stage a bit for our listeners. Can you give us a quick refresher on ecumenical councils? What makes them so important in the Orthodox tradition?
Okay, so ecumenical councils, they're kind of a big deal. Think of them as these pivotal moments in church history. Whenever a major theological debate popped up, or if the church needed to, clarify its stance on some big issue, they'd call an ecumenical council.
Oh, okay.
Bishops from all the local Orthodox churches would come together and, hash things out, try to find a unified response.
So not just a casual get-together then.
No, not at all. These councils had, and still have, huge weight. Their decisions really shaped the course of Orthodox Christianity.
Which is why I imagine the idea of calling a new one now is, well, it's getting people talking.
Yeah, to say the least, it's a pretty bold move.
And the context for this call is really interesting, too. You see, the source for this proposal argues that the Orthodox Church today, it's not facing the same kind of external threats as in centuries past. I mean, things like widespread persecution.
Right, they're saying those threats have lessened.
And instead, they point to what they call, and this is a loaded term, internal subversives as this new kind of danger. What exactly do they mean by that? Like, who are these internal subversives?
Well, it's interesting. They see modernity itself with its emphasis on individualism, questioning authority, independent thought as this kind of insidious threat to traditional faith.
So anyone who challenges the status quo is a potential subversive.
Well, that's one way to read it. They seem to be particularly concerned with people within the church, even those in positions of authority, who they feel prioritize their own interpretations or personal agendas over established doctrine.
Okay.
And it's this perceived internal struggle that's really at the heart of their proposal for a 10th Ecumenical Council.
Interesting. So they've identified a problem as they see it, and now they're proposing this very specific solution. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of their solutions, I'm curious about this idea of reduced persecution. Does that claim hold up historically?
It's complicated. It's true that in many parts of the world, the kind of, large-scale, systematic persecution of Christians that we saw in the past is less common these days.
That's good.
Yeah, definitely. But to frame it as a simple before and after, persecution is gone, risks overlooking the very real challenges to religious freedom that still exist today.
So not as clear-cut as the proposal might suggest.
Exactly. While widespread persecution might be less common, individual Orthodox communities, they still face pressure, discrimination, even violence in some parts of the world.
Do you have any examples?
Sure. Think about the situation of Orthodox Christians in some Middle Eastern countries. They're often a minority facing ongoing security concerns. Or look at the challenges for Orthodox communities in parts of Eastern Europe. Political tensions, historical grievances, those can create a very real sense of vulnerability.
Right. So the threat is still there, but it's different, maybe more. Yes, that's the word. Okay, so we've established that this source sees both external and internal threats facing the Orthodox Church today. And their solution, as we said, is a new ecumenical council. But what exactly do they want this council to do? What are the specific issues it outlines?
Well, it's a long list, and some of it's pretty, you could say ambitious. It might be best to take it one step at a time, start with the issue of communion. How familiar are you with that concept?
I think I could use a little refresher. Like, I know it has to do with recognizing other churches, but...
Right. So communion, in the simplest terms, means recognizing other churches as part of the same, universal church.
Right.
Ideally, all Orthodox churches would be in full communion with each other, operating as this unified body.
Like one big happy family.
You'd think, right.
But it's not quite that simple, is it?
Not quite. You see, the proposal points out that right now there are a bunch of instances where Orthodox churches don't fully recognize each other.
And the proposal calls that.
Partial communion.
Right, partial communion. And they argue that this fragmentation, this lack of total unity, it weakens the church, especially when it comes to facing those modern challenges we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. It's like trying to fight a battle with a divided army, you know?
Right, right. It undermines the church's ability to have a unified,
Front.
yes, a unified front. So how do they propose addressing this lack of unity?
Well, they get into the weeds, so to speak. They point to very specific areas where they see this lack of unity playing out, causing problems.
Yeah.
We're talking about things like jurisdiction, which basically boils down to who's in charge where and how the church handles new converts.
Okay, and this is where I think things start to get really interesting, because this is where you start to see their very specific vision for how they think the church should function.
Absolutely. And to understand that vision, we need to take a closer look at those specifics.
Yeah.
Jurisdiction and converts.
Okay, well, let's start with the jurisdiction. Where do things get murky there, and what do they want to do about it?
Yeah. So jurisdiction. It might sound kind of, dry, technical, but trust me, it's a big deal. It gets to the heart of some pretty intense debates within Orthodoxy.
Right, because ultimately it's about power, isn't it? Like, who gets to make the decisions?
Exactly. Jurisdiction is basically about authority. Who has the authority to lead, to minister within a particular geographic area?
Okay, so where does this proposal land on that whole question, on jurisdiction?
Well, they focus on areas where those lines of jurisdiction, they get kind of blurry. Places where that lack of unity that we talked about, it's causing some real problems. And they use missionary work as an example.
Oh, interesting.
Specifically, missionary work in places that, historically speaking, haven't been Orthodox. Places like, say, North America.
Oh, yeah, North America. That's a great example. You've got, what, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox. It's like a mini Orthodox world over here.
It really is. And that's kind of the problem, according to this proposal. You have all these different branches of Orthodoxy, all with a presence in North America, often reflecting, waves of immigration over the centuries.
Right, right.
And it's led to, well, let's just say there's a bit of overlap, sometimes even a bit of competition.
And the proposal sees that as a problem.
Oh, definitely. They argue that this kind of fragmented approach, it makes it harder for the church to, to do its thing effectively, to minister to people, to bring people into the Orthodox fold.
So what's their solution to this problem of too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak?
A bold one.
Yeah.
They call for the establishment of a single, unified, and here's the key word, autocephalous North American Orthodox Church.
Autocephalous. For those of us who didn't do our homework.
It basically means self-governing, independent.
Ah, okay.
So basically you'd have a North American Orthodox Church that's not answerable to any of the existing patriarchates, like Constantinople, Moscow, none of them. A bold idea, to say the least.
It's a huge idea. But wouldn't that be, like, incredibly difficult to pull off? I mean, we're talking about centuries of history, tradition. How do you just untangle all that?
Right. That's the million-dollar question. And to their credit, the authors of this proposal, they do acknowledge that there would be some practical hurdles, let's say.
Like what?
Well, for starters, a lot of the existing Orthodox communities in North America, they rely on financial support from their, what they call mother churches back in, Greece, Russia, wherever they originated.
Right.
So how do you reconcile this vision of an independent North American church with that financial reality?
Yeah, it's almost like they need those ties in a way.
Exactly. And the proposal actually offers a pretty interesting solution. They call it a spiritual tithe.
A spiritual tithe.
Yeah, basically they suggest that a portion of the North American church's income, it would be sent back to those mother churches as a way to, ensure continued financial support.
Huh. It's like trying to have your cake and eat it, too. Trying to create this unified structure while still honoring those historical ties, those financial obligations.
It's a balancing act, for sure. And speaking of balancing acts, that same tension between unity and diversity, it pops up again in another area the proposal addresses how the church handles new converts.
Oh, that's another one where, if I'm remembering correctly, there's like a million different approaches.
At least.
Yeah.
And again, for this proposal, that's a problem. They see it as creating confusion, undermining the church's authority. So they call for a standardized process.
It's interesting.
They want one set of rules, so to speak, for receiving converts, across all jurisdictions, and even go so far as to advocate for something called conditional baptism.
Conditional baptism, that sounds interesting. And maybe a little controversial. Break it down for us. What is that?
Okay, so you know how some churches require converts to be like fully baptized again, even if they were baptized in another Christian tradition?
Right, like if you were Catholic or Protestant or whatever and you wanted to become Orthodox.
Exactly. Some Orthodox churches say, nope, got to do the whole baptism thing again.
Mhm.
Others are cool with accepting the previous baptism. So conditional baptism is kind of like a middle ground.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does it work?
So the priest would perform a baptism, right? But with the understanding that it's only valid if the person's previous baptism, for whatever reason, was invalid.
So it's like a safeguard, just in case.
Exactly. A theological safety net, you could say.
Yeah.
It's a way to ensure that everyone's on the same page sacramentally, but without, completely dismissing someone's prior religious experience.
Well, we can see how that would appeal to some people, but I imagine it also rubs some people the wrong way, right?
Oh, absolutely. It gets into some really thorny theological debates about what constitutes a valid baptism and who has the authority to decide.
Right, of course. It's never simple, is it?
Never. And speaking of not simple, the proposal also wades into, let's just say a very complex and very sensitive subject, Orthodox leadership, specifically the whole Third Rome debate.
Ooh, Third Rome. Now we're getting to the good stuff. But before we get into that, for listeners who might not be familiar with this whole Third Rome thing, can you give us a quick history lesson?
Sure. So the Third Rome idea, it's deeply connected to Russian history, specifically the time of the Tsars. After Constantinople, the original Second Rome, fell to the Ottomans in 1453.
Right.
Moscow kind of started to see itself as the inheritor of that title, the new center of the Orthodox world.
Because geographically speaking, they were kind of it, right? After Constantinople fell, Moscow was the biggest game in town, so to speak.
Exactly. And this wasn't just some, abstract idea. It had real political weight. The proposal even mentions, and this is fascinating to me, that during the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan actually recognized the Russian Tsar as the protector of all Orthodox Christians living within Ottoman borders.
Wow, I did not know that.
Right. It just goes to show you how intertwined religion and politics could be.
Totally. So back to the proposal. How do they address this whole Third Rome legacy? Because it's still a thing, right? Even today.
It's definitely still a thing, which probably why the proposal felt the need to address it.
Yeah.
They don't explicitly say, Moscow, you're out, or Moscow, you're in. But they do say that a 10th Ecumenical Council, this council they're proposing, it should clearly define what Moscow's role should be.
So they're basically saying, let's have this council and let's settle this Third Rome question once and for all.
It sounds that way, yeah. They seem to want to, I don't know, maybe preempt any future power grabs based on this idea of Moscow as the Third Rome.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got their proposals for North America, for how to handle converts, and now this attempt to, address this huge historical baggage surrounding Moscow. Anything else on the agenda for this council?
Oh, yeah, plenty. And this is where it gets really, some might say a little too specific.
Like what? Give us an example.
Okay, so remember how we talked about the importance of a unified front?
Right, that seems to be a recurring theme.
Well, for the authors of this proposal, it extends even to things like the liturgical calendar.
Wait, really? The calendar?
The calendar. They want all Orthodox churches to use the same liturgical calendar.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. I'm a little lost here. Why is the calendar such a big deal?
Because not all Orthodox churches switched over to the revised Julian calendar when that was introduced in the 20th century. So right now, you have different branches of Orthodoxy celebrating Easter and other major feasts on different days.
Oh, I see. So it's about presenting a united front to the world, even down to when you celebrate Easter.
Exactly. It's all about consistency, about eliminating any of those, inconsistencies that might make the church seem divided.
Wow, fascinating. Okay, so we've got all these really specific organizational changes they're proposing, but do they address those broader challenges, the whole modernity thing we were talking about earlier?
They do, and this is where their stance on what's called ecumenism comes into play.
Ecumenism. There's another one of those words.
Basically, ecumenism is all about fostering dialogue, cooperation between different Christian denominations. Orthodox, Catholics, Protestants, trying to build bridges.
Got it. So interchurch relations, what do they have to say about that?
Well, their view on ecumenism is very much tied to their desire for internal unity within Orthodoxy. Their argument is basically that, look, the Orthodox Church needs to get its own house in order before it starts reaching out to other branches of Christianity.
So first things first, right?
Exactly. And they're pretty adamant about this. The proposal actually calls for a complete halt to ecumenical dialogues.
Whoa. Seriously?
Yep, especially with the Roman Catholic Church. They say no more dialogues until we've dealt with our own internal divisions.
Wow. That's a statement. It really shows you how important this idea of unity is to them.
It's paramount. A unified front is everything. And that emphasis on presenting an unwavering front to the world, it's especially clear in their final point, which, I'll be honest, is maybe the most startling of them all.
Okay, now you've got to tell me. What could be more startling than, reorganizing the entire church and telling everyone to get on the same page about the calendar?
Well, they saved the best for last, I guess. This last proposal revolves around the issue of anathemas.
Anathemas, that's not a word you hear every day. Before we get into that, and this last proposal, which I have a feeling is a doozy, can you remind us what an anathema is?
It's, well, it's basically a formal condemnation by the church.
Okay.
Like if the church wants to say, this person, this idea, it's out of bounds,
Right.
they issue an anathema. It's a way of saying, this is not okay with us.
So not something to be taken lightly then?
Not at all.
Mhm.
It's serious business.
Yeah.
And what makes the proposal's use of anathemas so striking is not just that they want to use them, but who they want to target.
Okay, yeah, you said it was a doozy. Hit me with it. Who are they anathematizing?
Well, it's a multi-layered thing. So on one level, they want the council to anathematize individuals within the Orthodox Church,
Mhm.
people they consider like heretics, those who they think are promoting teachings or engaging in practices that go against traditional doctrine.
And considering their stance on ecumenism, I'm guessing folks involved in those interchurch dialogues?
Yeah, they wouldn't be on their good side, that's for sure. The proposal specifically mentions anyone doing ecumenical stuff they don't approve of as, potential targets for anathema.
Mm.
But it doesn't end there.
Oh, there's more. Of course there's more.
See, this is where it gets really, some might say extreme. They don't just want to anathematize people within the Orthodox Church.
Okay.
They want to anathematize all other faiths.
Wait, seriously, like every other religion that's not Orthodox Christianity?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
It specifically mentions other Christian denominations, but
Yeah.
doesn't really stop there.
So they want to draw a line in the sand
Yeah,
between Orthodoxy and everyone else.
that's one way to put it. It's a lot. And whether that kind of moves would actually be good for Orthodoxy in this day and age, well, that's a whole other conversation.
You can see that again. So I think it's safe to say we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've gone from the nuances of what is communion to should we anathematize the entire world? And honestly, I'm a little speechless.
It's a wild ride, this proposal.
It really is. What are your final thoughts? Having gone through all this, what's your takeaway?
I think it really highlights this tension that exists, not just in Orthodoxy, but in a lot of religious institutions. It's this tension between wanting to hold on to your identity, your traditions, while also navigating a world that's constantly changing. And whether this vision, the one laid out in this proposal,
With the unity, the authority, the very clear boundary.
right, all of that, whether that's the way forward, well, I'll leave that for everyone else to debate.
A question for the ages, or at least a question for our listeners. So to everyone out there wondering, is this council actually going to happen? Well, your guess is as good as mine. But what I hope we've shown in this deep dive is that even in a tradition as ancient as Orthodoxy, well, there's still room for debate, still room for different visions of the future.
And those debates, those differences of opinion,
Mm-hmm.
that's what keeps the tradition alive. That's how it stays relevant.
100%. It's about finding that balance between the past and the present. And honestly, that's something we can all relate to, right? Whether we're religious or not. So until next time, keep those minds open, keep those questions coming, and we'll see you all on the next deep dive.